In 2018, an archaeologist named Chris Fisher stared at his computer screen in the Bolivian embassy in La Paz, watching a three-dimensional map materialize from laser data that had penetrated the jungle canopy near the Llanos de Mojos. What appeared on his monitor shouldn't have existed according to every textbook written before 1990, a city covering 11 square kilometers, complete with pyramids, causeways, reservoirs, and defensive earthworks, all hidden beneath vegetation so thick that archaeologists had walked within 50 meters of major structures without knowing they existed. The jungle had kept this secret for 500 years, and would have kept it longer if humans hadn't finally invented eyes that could see through green. The technology that's rewriting Amazonian history is called LiDAR, light detection and ranging, and it works like radar using laser pulses instead of radio waves. Mounted on aircraft, LiDAR systems fire millions of laser pulses per second toward the ground. Some pulses bounce off the canopy's top. Others penetrate through gaps in foliage, reflecting off branches, understory, and finally the ground itself. Sophisticated software filters out the vegetation returns, leaving only the ground surface, revealing topography that would take archaeologists decades to map through traditional survey methods. What this technology has revealed over the past decade staggers comprehension. The Amazon basin, long dismissed as pristine wilderness, inhabited only by small nomadic groups, was actually home to complex civilizations that modified landscapes on scales rivaling ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. Conservative estimates now suggest that 10 to 20 million people lived in the Amazon basin before European contact. Populations that created cities, agricultural systems, and monuments that the jungle consumed so completely that their existence was questioned until laser light proved what indigenous peoples had insisted for centuries. The story begins with fundamental misunderstanding. When European explorers first penetrated the Amazon in the 16th century, they found what appeared to be endless forest, inhabited by scattered groups living in basic conditions. This observation became orthodoxy. The Amazon's poor soils couldn't support agriculture or large populations. Therefore, complex civilizations had never developed here. This conclusion ignored inconvenient evidence. Francisco de Orellana's 1542 account of passing extensive riverside cities during his descent of the Amazon, indigenous oral histories describing great kingdoms, and early missionaries' reports of dense populations. By the 20th century, the scientific consensus had crystallized. Orellana had exaggerated or hallucinated. The Amazon had always been sparsely populated wilderness. Indigenous peoples were primitive hunter-gatherers who'd never developed agriculture or permanent settlements. This belief carried moral weight. It positioned the Amazon as pristine nature, requiring preservation from human impact, conveniently ignoring that indigenous peoples had shaped the forest for millennia. The first cracks in this consensus came from an unlikely source: satellite imagery. In the 1970s, photos revealed geometric shapes in deforested areas of Acre State in western Brazil, perfectly circular and square earthworks hundreds of meters across. These geoglyphs, as they came to be called, numbered in the hundreds across territories the size of Belgium. They'd been invisible under forest cover, but became apparent when ranchers cleared land for cattle. Carbon dating revealed construction between 1,000 and 2,000 years ago. The geoglyphs posed uncomfortable questions. Who built them? Why? And how many other structures remained hidden under intact forest? Conventional archaeology could only scratch the surface, literally. Ground survey in dense jungle proceeds at perhaps 1 square kilometer per season of backbreaking work. At that rate, surveying even 1% of the Amazon basin would require thousands of years. The forest's vastness made comprehensive exploration impossible, which meant unknown numbers of ancient sites remained undiscovered. Enter LiDAR. The first extensive Amazonian LiDAR survey, occurred in the Upper Xingu Basin in 2008, covering territories around the Kuhikugu complex discovered earlier by archaeologist Michael Heckenberger. Heckenberger had spent years documenting a pre-Columbian city, including roads, bridges, plazas, and defensive moats. The LiDAR revealed his ground discoveries were just a fraction of the site's true extent. The city had been 5 times larger than ground survey suggested, with suburban settlements connected by causeways extending for kilometers. The Kuhikugu complex at its peak housed an estimated 50,000 people in the central city, with satellite towns bringing total population above 100,000. Larger than most European cities of the same period, around 1500 CE. The settlement pattern showed deliberate urban planning, plazas oriented to cardinal directions, roads laid in straight lines requiring surveying knowledge, residential areas segregated by function, and defensive moats protecting the urban core. This wasn't a loose collection of villages, it was a city with all that implies about social organization, specialized labor, and centralized authority. The agricultural basis supporting such populations initially baffled researchers. Amazonian soils are notoriously poor. Nutrients leach rapidly in tropical rain, leaving acidic clay that can't sustain intensive farming. Yet somehow, ancient Amazonians fed tens of thousands from these supposedly infertile lands. The answer emerged from study of terra preta, black earth, which dots the Amazon basin in thousands of locations. Terra preta is anthropogenic, created deliberately by pre-Columbian peoples through addition of charcoal, bone, compost, and other organic materials to native soil. The result is soil of extraordinary fertility that remains productive 1,000 years after its creation. Terra preta deposits often extend several feet deep and cover dozens of hectares, representing centuries of soil engineering by societies that understood soil chemistry in practical, if not theoretical terms. The presence of terra preta indicates permanent settlements. You don't invest generations in soil improvement for temporary camps. And the scale of terra preta deposits suggests large populations living in fixed locations for centuries. Essentially, ancient Amazonians solved the soil problem through technology, creating artificial fertility that supported agricultural civilizations in landscapes that appeared to preclude them. The Llanos de Mojos region in Bolivia has emerged as perhaps the most spectacular example of Amazonian landscape engineering. This seasonally flooded grassland savanna, dismissed as unsuitable for settlement, actually contains one of the most extensive archaeological landscapes in the Americas. LiDAR surveys conducted between 2016 and 2019 revealed more than 300 geometric earthworks across 4,500 square kilometers, massive raised platforms, fish weirs, causeways, and agricultural fields representing hydraulic engineering on continental scale. The earthworks include raised platforms up to 20 meters high, covering several hectares, artificial hills where cities perched above seasonal floods. Causeways connect these platforms in networks extending dozens of kilometers, enabling year-round communication and trade despite seasonal inundation. Extensive canal systems drained fields during wet season and retained water during dry season, creating controlled agricultural environments that produced multiple annual harvests. The labor required to construct these earthworks staggers imagination. The largest platforms represent millions of cubic meters of earth moved using only human labor and baskets, work requiring thousands of workers coordinated over decades. This level of mobilization implies centralized authority, specialized bureaucracy, and economic surplus to support non-producing administrators and engineers. In other words, these were state-level societies, not the simple tribal groups that ethnographic analogy suggested. The geometric precision of many earthworks suggests astronomical knowledge and surveying expertise. Circular geoglyphs in Acre maintain perfect circles hundreds of meters in diameter, requiring mathematical understanding and careful execution. Some earthworks align with solstice sunrises or lunar standstills, indicating astronomical observation informing construction. This isn't primitive, it's sophisticated science applied to monumental architecture, comparable to achievements of better-known civilizations elsewhere. The demographic scale of pre-Columbian Amazonia becomes clearer as LiDAR surveys accumulate. A 2018 study in the journal Nature synthesized data from multiple surveys, estimating that at least 1,200 major archaeological sites exist in the Amazon basin, and that represents perhaps 5% of what remains hidden under intact forest. Extrapolating from surveyed areas suggests 10,000 to 25,000 significant archaeological sites await discovery, representing settlements housing millions of people at the civilization's peak around 1500 CE. Then came 1492, and everything collapsed with speed that seems almost supernatural. European contact introduced diseases, smallpox, measles, typhus, influenza, to populations with no immunity whatsoever. Mortality rates reached 90% in many regions, sometimes higher. Entire cities emptied within decades. Survivors lacked numbers to maintain agricultural systems requiring mass labor. Fields reverted to forest. Causeways collapsed. Earthworks slowly eroded. By the time European explorers penetrated the Amazon's interior in the 18th and 19th centuries, the civilizations were gone, vanished so completely that their existence seemed impossible. The forest had reclaimed territories that had been heavily populated just 2 centuries earlier. What appeared to be wilderness was actually a ghost landscape, secondary growth over the ruins of vanished cities. The indigenous peoples encountered by Europeans were survivors, refugees from demographic catastrophe, maintaining fragments of knowledge about civilizations their grandparents had known. This catastrophic depopulation explains the discrepancy between Orellana's 1542 accounts of densely populated riversides and later explorers' observations of sparse populations. Orellana saw the civilization at its peak, just before disease struck. Later explorers saw the aftermath, a landscape emptying so rapidly that indigenous peoples themselves forgot the extent of their ancestors' achievements. Indigenous oral histories preserved some memories. The Kwikuro people of the Upper Xingu, descendants of Kuhikugu's inhabitants, maintained stories of powerful ancestors who built great towns and fought wars with neighboring kingdoms. When archaeologists began excavating Kuhikugu in the 1990s, they consulted Kwikuro elders whose knowledge proved remarkably accurate, describing moat locations, plaza layouts, and road directions that excavation confirmed. What academic archaeology had dismissed as myth turned out to be history. The Mojeño people of Bolivia similarly preserved accounts of ancestors who moved mountains and made the rivers obey. Spanish missionaries recorded these stories in the 18th century, but interpreted them as folklore. Modern archaeology now recognizes them as accurate descriptions of the Llanos de Mojos earthworks, massive landscape modifications that would indeed appear to outsiders as moving mountains and controlling rivers. This pattern repeats throughout the Amazon. What Europeans dismissed as primitive superstition often proves to be historical account, compressed, metaphorized, but fundamentally accurate. Indigenous peoples knew about the ancient cities because they descended from those cities' inhabitants. They knew about earthworks because their great-grandparents had maintained them. They knew about agricultural systems because fragments persisted in their own practices. The failure was European refusal to credit indigenous knowledge as valid historical source. Recent discoveries keep expanding our understanding of pre-Columbian Amazonian sophistication. In 2020, LIDAR surveys in the Putumayo region revealed networks of ring ditches and raised platforms previously unknown to archaeology. In 2021, surveys in the Tapajos Basin identified massive terra preta deposits associated with geometric earthworks, suggesting another major population center. Each new survey reveals more complexity, more population, more sophisticated engineering than previous estimates suggested. The ecological implications challenge conservation paradigms. If the Amazon basin housed millions of people for over a millennium, then the forest we see today isn't pristine wilderness. It's cultural landscape shaped by human activity. The distribution of useful tree species, Brazil nuts, acai palms, cacao, reflects pre-columbian planting and cultivation. The prevalence of bamboo in certain regions indicates abandoned agricultural sites where this fast-growing species colonized cleared land. This means conservation strategies must account for indigenous management rather than excluding humans from pristine ecosystems. The Amazon's extraordinary biodiversity may partly result from millennia of human cultivation, selection, and landscape modification. Protecting the forest requires understanding it as anthropogenic landscape, where humans aren't intruders but integral components whose sustainable practices maintain productivity for centuries. The technology enabling these discoveries continues advancing. Modern LIDAR systems achieve resolution showing individual trees and subtle ground features invisible to earlier surveys. Ground-penetrating radar complements LIDAR, revealing subsurface features like buried walls and structures. Drone-mounted systems make surveys possible in areas where piloted aircraft can't safely fly. Yet technology alone doesn't make discoveries. It requires archaeologists interpreting data, recognizing patterns, distinguishing cultural features from natural formations. A circular depression might be natural sinkhole or cultural feature. And alignment might be coincidental topography or intentional construction. Ground truthing, actually visiting sites revealed by LIDAR, remains essential to confirm interpretation and understand context. This ground truthing reveals details LIDAR can't capture. Ceramic styles, carbon dates, artifact distributions, architectural details. These require hands-on archaeology that LIDAR merely guides to promising locations. The combination transforms archaeology from needle-in-haystack searching to hypothesis-driven investigation, dramatically accelerating discovery while reducing cost. Not everyone celebrates these discoveries. The revelation that the Amazon housed millions challenges both environmentalist narratives of pristine wilderness and nationalist myths about frontier territories awaiting development. Some environmental groups worry that acknowledging past human populations might justify current deforestation and development. Some governments cite discoveries to dispute indigenous land claims, arguing that modern tribes aren't descendants of ancient civilizations and thus lack historical rights to territories. Archaeologists find themselves navigating political minefields. Discoveries meant to illuminate past human achievement get conscripted into present land disputes, conservation debates, and identity politics. The safest scientific position, that pre-Columbian Amazonians modified landscapes sustainably for centuries, that modern indigenous peoples descend from those populations, and that conservation must account for human presence, satisfies neither those wanting pristine wilderness nor those wanting unrestricted development. Indigenous communities have mixed responses to archaeological discoveries on their territories. Some welcome validation that ancestors built great civilizations, countering narratives of primitiveness. Others resent outside scientists studying ancestors without permission or profit-sharing, treating indigenous history as academic resource rather than community heritage. Many worry that discoveries will attract tourism, development, or treasure hunters, disturbing sacred sites and disrupting communities. The most successful archaeological projects involve indigenous communities as partners rather than subjects. The Kwikuro archaeologist collaboration at Kuhikugu exemplifies this approach. Research proceeds with community permission, employs indigenous assistance, incorporates oral tradition with archaeological evidence, and respects sacred sites as off-limits regardless of scientific interest. Results are shared with the community before publication, and findings contribute to cultural revitalization and education rather than purely academic goals. As LiDAR surveys expand, the map of pre-Columbian Amazonia grows more complex. Clear patterns are emerging, major settlements clustered along major rivers and in seasonally flooded savannas, extensive earthwork complexes in the southwestern Amazon, dense networks of ring ditches in the northwest, massive terra preta deposits throughout. But vast territories remain unsurveyed, particularly in the central Amazon, where forest is densest and most remote. What remains undiscovered almost certainly exceeds what we've found. The surveys conducted so far cover perhaps 2% of the Amazon basin, selected areas where researchers had funding, permits, and reason to suspect significant archaeology. The other 98% might hold anything. Larger cities, different settlement patterns, earlier or later occupations, cultural groups unknown to history. The possibility of truly lost cities, major urban centers completely unrecorded in either oral tradition or historical documents, remains tantalizingly real. The speed with which civilizations collapsed meant that remote settlements might have been abandoned before any European ever heard of them, leaving no documentary trail. If such places exist, only LiDAR will reveal them, and only if we survey the right square kilometer among millions. The temporal depth of Amazonian occupation extends far beyond the late pre-Columbian cities. Archaeological evidence documents human presence for at least 13,000 years, possibly longer. Earlier periods remain poorly understood. LiDAR reveals earthworks and settlements from the past 2,000 years, but earlier occupations left different signatures that might not appear in current data. Expanding archaeological methods to find earlier sites remains a frontier requiring different approaches. The question haunting Amazonian archaeology is whether the civilizations revealed by LiDAR represent the Amazon's full potential or merely one trajectory among many. If disease hadn't struck, if European conquest hadn't shattered societies, would Amazonian civilizations have continued developing, perhaps building in stone like contemporaries in the Andes, perhaps developing writing systems, perhaps creating empires spanning the basin? We'll never know what trajectory was interrupted, only that sophisticated, populous, complex societies existed and were destroyed before they could fully reveal their potential. The jungle keeps what remains of these civilizations with typical ambivalence, neither protecting nor destroying, simply incorporating ruins into forest ecology where earthworks become hills, plazas become clearings, and causeways become slightly elevated ground that travelers walk without recognizing as ancient road. Only the pattern reveals itself from above when laser light strips away vegetation to expose geometry that nature rarely creates. What the lost cities teach depends on who's listening. Archaeologists hear evidence of human adaptability and ingenuity, people solving the Amazon's challenges through technology and organization. Indigenous peoples hear validation that ancestors were powerful, sophisticated, and numerous, countering colonial narratives that justified conquest and marginalization. Environmentalists confront uncomfortable complexity, that the forest is partly human creation and that conservation must include rather than exclude people. Historians confront the fragility of civilization, how quickly populations can collapse, cities empty, and achievements vanish when disease or conquest strikes. The Amazon conceals these lessons beneath green that regenerates within decades, hiding earthworks under vegetation so thoroughly that you can stand on a pyramid without knowing it's not a hill. Only from above, through eyes that see through leaves to ground itself, does the pattern emerge. Circles, squares, rectangles, arranged too perfectly for nature, aligned too precisely for coincidence, extending too far for accident. The discoveries will continue. LiDAR systems improve. Funding for surveys increases. Political will to understand rather than exploit grows, however unevenly. Each new flight reveals more complexity, more sophistication, more evidence that the Amazon has never been the empty wilderness that convenience assumed. The estimate of pre-Columbian population keeps rising. 10 million becomes 15 million, becomes 20 million, as each survey reveals settlement density exceeding previous projections. Where this ends, no one knows. Perhaps when the entire basin has been surveyed, we'll have complete map of pre-Columbian settlement. Perhaps we'll find limitations, large territories that were genuinely uninhabited, regions where civilization never penetrated, true wilderness persisting alongside cultural landscape. Or perhaps we'll discover that nearly every square kilometer of the Amazon shows some sign of human presence, that what appears to be nature has been garden all along, tended for millennia before catastrophe drove the gardeners away. The jungle itself seems indifferent to these questions, growing over ruins with equal enthusiasm, whether we care about them or not. It has outlasted the civilizations that shaped it and will outlast our attempts to understand them. The cities hidden beneath its canopy wait with the patience of stone and earth, not caring whether laser light reveals them or darkness conceals them, not mourning their abandonment or celebrating potential discovery, simply existing as they have for centuries, while roots crack walls and vines strangle monuments. But for those of us who walk above these ruins, without knowing they're beneath our feet, the revelation changes everything. The Amazon isn't wilderness. It's a cemetery of civilizations, a gallery of achievements, a library of knowledge inscribed in earth and charcoal. Every hill might be pyramid. Every clearing might be plaza. Every slight elevation might be causeway connecting cities whose names died with their inhabitants 5 centuries ago. The jungle keeps these secrets less willingly now, as technology penetrates green curtains that concealed them for half a millennium. What remains hidden won't stay hidden forever. Only until the next survey flight, the next data analysis, the next archaeologist who sees pattern where others saw noise. The lost cities are being found. One laser scan at a time, one earthwork at a time, one ancient plaza emerging from data cloud to join the map of civilizations we're only beginning to comprehend. If you're drawn to the intersection of cutting-edge technology and ancient mystery, to watching as laser light rewrites history that was written in Earth, to understanding that the Amazon conceals not just undiscovered species, but entire civilizations waiting for eyes that can see through green, join us as we trace the patterns emerging from jungle darkness into digital light. Subscribe and venture deeper into secrets of the Amazon jungle.